The alien arrival. The stars shimmered like scattered diamonds across the vast canvas of space. Zora, an explorer from the luminous planet Luminara, sat confidently at the helm of her sleek starship, Celestia. Her glowing blue skin reflected the soft hum of her ship's control panel, and her silver hair flowed around her like liquid starlight. Zora's violet eyes sparkled with curiosity as she navigated through an unexplored nebula, a region where cosmic energy pulsed like the heartbeat of the universe. "Faster, Celestia," she whispered, her voice tinged with thrill. Her mission, to uncover the wonders of the galaxy and to document the resilience of civilizations. Zora's love for the unknown had driven her to the edges of her galaxy and beyond. The nebula ahead shimmered with vibrant hues, and she felt its strange energy tugging at her soul. Suddenly, a warning alarm blared, jolting Zora out of her reverie. The ship trembled violently, and the glowing controls flickered erratically. "What's happening?" she gasped, gripping the panel tightly. The swirling vortex of energy ahead seemed to stretch and warp, pulling Celestia toward it with an overwhelming force. "Hold together, girl," Zora murmured, her voice steady despite the chaos. But the ship's systems failed to respond, and she was helpless as the vortex swallowed her whole. The brilliant colors of the nebula spiraled into a tunnel of light, and Zora felt the world blur around her. Her heart raced as she braced for impact. With a deafening crash, Celestia broke through the atmosphere of an unknown planet, hurtling toward the ground. A massive jolt threw Zora against her seat as the ship skidded and came to a halt with a shuddering groan. The silence that followed was eerie. Zora unbuckled herself and cautiously stepped out of the damaged craft. Her surroundings were nothing like she had ever seen. Rows of desks, strange flat surfaces covered in scribbles, and odd rectangular devices were scattered around the room. She realized with growing amazement that her ship had crashed through the roof of a strange structure. It was a classroom. A group of wide-eyed students stared at her, frozen in shock. The bell had just rung, signaling the end of their geography lesson, but none of them moved. The teacher, a man in his late 20s clutching a stack of books, looked as if he might faint. "What in the galaxy?" he stammered, his voice barely audible. Zora straightened herself, brushing dust from her shimmering attire. "Greetings, inhabitants of this world," she announced, her voice bright and confident. "I am Zora, explorer of Luminara. Where am I?" The silence deepened as every pair of eyes remained locked on her. Finally, a student muttered, Earth?" Zora tilted her head, intrigued. "Earth? Fascinating." Her gaze swept the room, taking in the humans' expressions of shock, curiosity, and awe. She noticed their strange but intriguing forms, so different from her own. As the teacher gathered his courage to speak, Zora's curiosity bubbled over. "You humans are so interesting. Tell me, how do you reproduce?" The question hung in the air like an uninvited guest. A few students burst into nervous laughter, while others turned bright red. The teacher blinked rapidly, his mouth opening and closing as he struggled to find words. What?" he finally managed, his voice a mix of disbelief and embarrassment. "That's a very personal question." Zora leaned forward, genuinely intrigued. "Personal? On Luminara, we openly discuss such matters. I simply wish to understand your fascinating species better." The classroom erupted into muffled laughter and whispers. One brave student raised his hand, half joking. Miss Alien, maybe we should start with something less awkward." "Excellent idea." Zora beamed. "Teach me everything. Your ways, your culture, your rituals." The students exchanged incredulous glances, unsure whether to laugh or panic. The teacher finally stepped forward, regaining some composure. "Miss Zora, let's, discuss this somewhere more private. Maybe not in front of the entire class." "Oh, splendid!" Zora exclaimed. "Shall we all go together?" She gestured enthusiastically, her violet eyes sparkling. No, no, the teacher stammered. Just you and me. Let's talk in my office. The students groaned in disappointment as Zora followed the teacher out of the classroom, her radiant presence turning heads in the hallway. She didn't notice the crowd gathering outside, their phones raised, capturing videos and photos of the alien with glowing skin and shimmering hair. Unbeknownst to her, Zora's arrival on Earth had already begun to ripple through the small town, and the world beyond. And this was only the beginning of her adventure. First encounters and curiosity. The teacher, still visibly flustered, led Zora through the school's crowded hallway. Students and staff froze in their tracks, gaping at the glowing alien following him. Zora's silver hair shimmered under the fluorescent lights, and her confident stride made her look more like a visiting dignitary than an unintentional crash-lander. Where are we going? Zora asked, her voice bright and full of curiosity. She glanced around at the lockers, bulletin boards, and startled humans. Is this a central knowledge-sharing hub? Something like that, the teacher replied nervously. He hadn't introduced himself yet, his mind racing about how to handle this situation. He finally managed, I'm Jake, by the way. Biology teacher. Biology? Zora's face lit up with enthusiasm. You study living organisms? Wonderful. I have so many questions. Jake gave a weak laugh as he pushed open the door to his office. He gestured for Zora to step inside, and she did, marveling at the cramped yet cozy space. A desk piled with books, a few potted plants, and a poster of the human anatomy filled the room. This is where you study biology, she asked, touching a plant leaf gently. How quaint. Do you grow specimens here? Those are just office plants, Jake said, awkwardly scratching his head. Not for experiments. Zora tilted her head, absorbing the information. Fascinating. Your species cherishes the aesthetic as much as the functional. Tell me, Jake, what else do humans value? Jake hesitated, overwhelmed by the question. Well, that's complicated. We value different things: family, art, science, survival. Survival. Zora's eyes sparkled. Your species has an extraordinary resilience. I've read that you've endured environmental extremes, disease, and even conflicts with each other. How do you manage such diversity? Jake blinked, realizing Zora wasn't just curious, she was utterly fascinated by humanity. I guess, we adapt. We use our creativity to solve problems. Creativity, Zora repeated, as if testing the word. An admirable trait. Before Jake could respond, a knock came at the door. The principal, a middle-aged woman with an air of authority, entered. Her sharp gaze shifted between Jake and Zora. Jake, what's going on? Who, or what is this? Zora stepped forward, offering a gracious smile. Greetings. I am Zora from Luminera, an explorer studying the resilience of civilizations. I seem to have arrived here by accident. The principal's mouth opened, then closed, her usual composure faltering. An explorer? You crashed through our roof. Zora nodded earnestly. A minor inconvenience. I assure you, no harm was intended. The principal turned to Jake. And you brought her here? Jake raised his hands defensively. She's not exactly dangerous. Just curious. Curious was an understatement. Zora's violet eyes were already scanning the principal's name tag. Principal Green. A leader, I assume. Your structured hierarchy is intriguing. Principal Green stared at her. We need to call someone. The authorities. NASA, maybe? Authorities? Zora asked, tilting her head. Would they not find this exchange equally fascinating? Jake interjected quickly. Principal Green, maybe we should keep this quiet for now. You know how the media will react. Green's lips thinned. Jake, this is well beyond our expertise. And yet, Zora said brightly, you've handled it remarkably well so far. The principal sighed, clearly out of her depth. Fine. But this stays between us for now. Zora clapped her hands. Splendid. Shall we proceed with the learning? Zora explores humanity. Jake decided the best way to calm the situation, and satisfy Zora's relentless curiosity, was to introduce her to everyday Earth life. He bundled her into his car, a rattling old sedan that drew even more stares as it pulled out of the school parking lot. What an extraordinary machine! Zora said, examining the dashboard. Primitive, yet effective. Does it run on combustion? Yeah, Jake replied, glancing at her as she poked at the air conditioning controls. It's not exactly cutting edge. But cutting edge isn't always necessary, Zora said, smiling. Your resourcefulness is admirable. Jake pulled into a coffee shop, thinking it might be a quieter place to talk. Inside, the rich aroma of roasted beans filled the air. Zora's eyes widened as she watched baristas working behind the counter. Is this where humans prepare nourishment? She asked. Not exactly. This is more for enjoyment, Jake explained. Coffee's a drink. People come here to relax. Zora nodded thoughtfully. So, a cultural ritual. Wonderful. She ordered a drink at Jake's suggestion, marveling at the steaming cup placed before her. What an intriguing aroma, she said, taking a cautious sip. Her eyes widened. Exquisite. Is this brewed from organic material? Yeah, it's made from coffee beans. Zora looked at him in awe. You process organic material into a liquid for sustenance and pleasure. Remarkable. The patrons around them whispered and stared, some snapping photos with their phones. Zora didn't seem to notice. She was too busy peppering Jake with questions. What powers your cities? How do you communicate across vast distances? Do you often create such diverse art and music? Jake did his best to answer, though some questions stumped him. We have electricity for power and satellites for communication. And yeah, art and music are big parts of our culture. Zora leaned closer, her curiosity unending. What about your reproductive rituals? Jake nearly choked on his coffee. Can we not? Zora tilted her head. Why not? It seems central to your species' survival. Jake flushed. It's just personal. Zora sighed. Humans and their secrets. Very well. Tell me more about your resilience instead. As Jake answered Zora's questions, he couldn't help but notice the crowd growing outside the coffee shop. Word of the alien visitor had spread like wildfire, and people were beginning to gather, phones in hand. Zora, however, remained oblivious. Your species has achieved so much despite your fragility, she said, her voice filled with admiration. Luminera could learn much from you. Jake felt a pang of pride at her words but also a growing sense of unease. The longer Zora stayed, the more attention she drew. And if the wrong people found out? As the first police car pulled up outside, Jake's unease turned into outright dread. Discovering humanity. The hum of murmuring voices outside the coffee shop grew louder, and Zora finally took notice. She turned to Jake, her violet eyes filled with curiosity, as she gestured toward the crowd gathering by the windows. Jake shifted uncomfortably, glancing at the approaching police car. It seems your people are eager to meet me, Zora said, her voice tinged with amusement. Jake sighed, realizing there was no way to avoid the inevitable. The coffee shop door opened, and two police officers stepped in, their expressions a mix of caution and confusion. Jake instinctively placed himself between Zora and the officers, raising a hand to calm the situation. She's not dangerous, Jake blurted out, his voice firmer than he felt. She's just visiting. The officers exchanged glances, their hands hovering near their holsters. One of them, a tall woman with sharp features, stepped forward. "Sir, we've received several reports about an unusual individual. Can we ask who this is?" Zora stood, her radiant form catching the dim light of the shop, and offered a gracious smile. "Greetings. I am Zora, an explorer from Luminera. I mean no harm. I simply wish to understand your fascinating species." The officer blinked, her hand faltering as she tried to process what she had just heard. The other officer muttered under his breath, clearly unnerved. Jake took the opportunity to step in again. "She crash-landed nearby. Her ship's damaged. She's just trying to learn about us." The tension in the room was palpable, but Zora's calm demeanor seemed to ease the officer's unease. The woman finally nodded, lowering her hand. "All right, but we'll need to inform the authorities. NASA, maybe even the government. This is above our pay grade." Jake winced, knowing this was exactly what he had hoped to avoid. Zora, however, seemed unfazed. "Your authorities may come if they wish," she said with a serene smile. "I have nothing to hide." Jake groaned inwardly. The crowd outside pressed closer to the windows, some recording videos, others simply staring in awe. Zora turned her gaze back to Jake, her expression untroubled. "Your people seem so curious. It's endearing." Before Jake could respond, the officers decided to escort them out of the shop. The crowd parted as they stepped outside, murmurs rippling through the onlookers. Zora raised a hand in a polite wave, her silver hair catching the sunlight. "It's wonderful to meet you all," she called out, her voice carrying a warmth that silenced the murmurs for a moment. Jake hurried to keep up as the officers led them toward their car. "Where are we going?" he whispered urgently. "To the station," one of the officers replied curtly. "Until we figure out who to contact." Zora climbed into the back seat of the police car without hesitation, her curiosity piqued by the unfamiliar vehicle. She ran her fingers over the interior, marveling at its design. "Your transportation technology is so functional," she said, looking at Jake with genuine admiration. "Not elegant, but practical." Jake sighed, sliding into the seat beside her. "Yeah, welcome to Earth." The ride to the station was uneventful, though Zora's endless stream of questions kept Jake occupied. She wanted to know about Earth's energy sources, its history, and its people. Jake answered as best he could, though her enthusiasm was exhausting. At the station, Zora was placed in a small interview room, where she sat calmly, her glowing presence making the stark room feel oddly vibrant. Jake remained by her side, though he couldn't shake the growing sense of dread. The officers outside were making calls, and it was only a matter of time before someone higher up took an interest. Zora seemed oblivious to his concern. "Your people have such fascinating structures," she said, gesturing to the room. "Everything is designed with purpose. It's a reflection of your ingenuity." Jake leaned back in his chair, running a hand through his hair. "Zora, you might not realize this, but humans, we're not always great with the unknown. If the government gets involved, they might not treat you kindly." Zora tilted her head, studying him. "Why would they fear me? I've done nothing to harm anyone." "It's not about what you've done," Jake explained. "It's about what they think you could do." She considered this for a moment, her violet eyes thoughtful. "Fear of potential danger. A logical response. Yet, it limits understanding." Jake nodded. "Exactly." Before Zora could respond, the door opened, and a man in a dark suit stepped in, flanked by two more officers. His expression was calm, but his sharp gaze immediately locked onto Zora. "I'm Agent Miller," he said, his tone professional. "I represent a branch of the government tasked with handling unusual situations." Zora stood, offering a polite nod. "A pleasure to meet you, Agent Miller. I am Zora of Luminera." Agent Miller studied her for a long moment before turning to Jake. "And you are?" "Jake." "Biology teacher," Jake replied, his voice steady despite his nerves. Miller gave a curt nod. "All right. Let's get some answers." He gestured to the chair. "Zora, if you don't mind, I'd like to ask you a few questions." "Of course," Zora said, her tone as warm as ever. "I'm happy to share what I know." As the interrogation began, Jake felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Zora's open and trusting nature might not be enough to protect her from what was coming. He could only hope that humanity's better nature would prevail. Conflict and revelations. Zora sat poised and calm in the interrogation room, her radiant presence softening the starkness of her surroundings. Agent Miller, with his sharp suit and calculating eyes, leaned forward across the table, a notepad resting before him. The air was tense, but Zora remained unshaken, her curiosity about the situation overshadowing any fear. "You claim to be from a planet called Luminara," Miller began, his voice measured. "Can you prove that?" Zora nodded, her silver hair catching the fluorescent light as she gestured to the glowing emblem on her attire. "This insignia represents my home world, a planet rich in energy and light. My ship, Celestia, contains records of my journey. If you allow me access, I can show you evidence of my origin." Miller exchanged a glance with the officer standing behind him. "Your ship is currently being secured by our team. We'll decide if and when it's safe to investigate. For now, let's focus on your intentions. Why are you here?" "I am an explorer," Zora replied with a smile. "My mission is to study civilizations and understand their resilience. Your planet intrigued me. Your species thrives in diverse conditions, overcoming challenges that would crumble many others." Miller raised an eyebrow. "Resilience? What do you mean by that?" "Your ability to adapt, to innovate," Zora explained. "Despite limited resources and internal conflicts, you survive. Thrive, even. It's remarkable." Jake, who had been watching silently from the corner of the room, felt a swell of pride at her words. But Agent Miller remained stoic, scribbling a note on his pad. "And what do you intend to do with this information?" Miller pressed. "Why should we believe you're not a threat?" Zora's expression softened. "I understand your caution. But I assure you, I come in peace. My people value knowledge and harmony. We believe understanding fosters growth." The room fell silent for a moment as Miller studied her. Jake felt the weight of the man's skepticism, and he couldn't blame him. Trusting an alien wasn't exactly a part of his training manual. As Miller prepared to ask another question, the door opened, and another officer stepped in, whispering something into his ear. Miller's eyes narrowed. "Excuse me for a moment," he said, rising and leaving the room. Zora turned to Jake, her curiosity undiminished. "Is this suspicion typical of your species?" Jake sighed, leaning forward. "Yeah, kind of. Humans don't handle the unknown well. We've got a history of not trusting things we don't understand." Zora nodded thoughtfully. "Fear is a natural response. But it also limits potential." Jake couldn't argue with that. Before he could say more, the door opened again, and Miller returned, his face unreadable. He took his seat and folded his hands on the table. "It seems your arrival has caused more than a little disruption," he said. "There's a growing crowd outside the station, and the media's already caught wind of this." Zora tilted her head. "They are curious, no doubt. A positive sign." "Not necessarily," Miller countered. "Curiosity can quickly turn into chaos. People fear what they don't understand, and fear leads to bad decisions." Jake cut in. "She hasn't done anything wrong. She's just trying to learn." Miller gave him a sharp look. "That may be true, but this isn't just about her intentions. We have to think about the bigger picture, what her presence means for us. The tension in the room thickened. Jake knew Miller wasn't entirely wrong. Zora's arrival had implications that went far beyond a single town or even a single nation. But he also knew that treating her as a threat would only make things worse. Before anyone could say more, the station's lights flickered, and a low hum filled the air. Zora's eyes widened, her luminescent skin glowing faintly. That energy, it feels familiar. Miller frowned. What's happening? Zora closed her eyes for a moment, focusing. It's the vortex. My ship was pulled through an unstable energy field. If it's still active, it could destabilize your planet's atmosphere. Jake stared at her. Wait, you're saying Earth is in danger? Possibly, Zora admitted, her tone serious. If the vortex remains open, it could disrupt your planet's energy balance. My ship's systems might be able to neutralize it, but they were damaged in the crash. Miller's demeanor shifted, his skepticism giving way to concern. And how do we fix it? I need access to my ship, Zora said firmly. With the right tools and your assistance, I believe we can stabilize the vortex before it causes irreparable harm. Miller hesitated, clearly weighing his options. Finally, he stood. All right. But you'll be under strict supervision. Zora nodded. Of course. Cooperation is key. Jake couldn't help but feel a mix of relief and apprehension. They were about to embark on a mission that could determine the fate of the planet, and the stakes couldn't be higher. As the group prepared to leave the station, the crowd outside had grown even larger, their faces a mix of awe and fear. Zora stepped out into the open, her glowing presence silencing the murmurs for a moment. She raised a hand in a gesture of peace. I come to help, she said, her voice carrying above the noise. Together, we can protect your world. The words hung in the air, a fragile promise in the face of an uncertain future. Jake could only hope that humanity was ready to meet the challenge. The race to save Earth. The air was electric with tension as Zora, Jake, and a small team of government officials arrived at the crash site. Zora's ship, Celestia, stood battered but still magnificent, its luminescent hull flickering faintly as if it were alive. Around it, a team of scientists and engineers worked cautiously, their movements hesitant under the watchful eyes of armed guards. Zora stepped forward, her presence commanding yet calm. Please, let me assess the damage. Time is critical. Agent Miller gave a nod, and the guards reluctantly stepped aside. Zora approached her ship, running her glowing fingers along its damaged exterior. Jake followed closely, feeling an odd mix of awe and anxiety. He could see the strain on Zora's face as she examined her once pristine vessel. The energy conduits are fractured, Zora said, more to herself than anyone else. The stabilizers are offline, and the vortex disruptor is non-functional. But it's reparable. Reparable? Jake asked, his voice tinged with hope. Zora turned to him, her violet eyes steady. Yes, but I'll need assistance. Your tools and materials can be adapted to my technology. Agent Miller stepped forward, arms crossed. You'll get what you need, but we'll have to vet everything. We can't risk anything being misused. Zora nodded. Understandable. Let's work together. With Miller's approval, a team of engineers brought over a variety of tools and equipment. Zora directed them with precision, explaining the modifications needed in simple terms. Her knowledge and confidence seemed to win over even the most skeptical members of the team. Jake, though far from an engineer, found himself lending a hand, following Zora's instructions as best he could. As they worked, the ground beneath them trembled slightly, and the air grew unnaturally still. Zora looked up, her expression grim. The vortex is expanding. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. How much time do we have? Not long, Zora replied. We must activate the disruptor soon, or the vortex will destabilize your atmosphere. The team worked faster, the urgency palpable. Sparks flew as Zora fused alien components with Earth's machinery, her hands moving with a precision that seemed almost otherworldly. Jake marveled at her focus, wondering how someone could remain so calm under such pressure. Suddenly, a loud crack echoed through the air. The crowd gathered nearby gasped as a fissure of light split the sky, revealing the swirling chaos of the vortex. Its iridescent colors were beautiful yet terrifying, a reminder of the immense power they were up against. Miller barked orders into his radio. "Get the perimeter cleared. We can't afford any civilian casualties." Zora remained unshaken, her attention fixed on her ship. "The disruptor is almost ready," she said. "Jake, I need you to stabilize the output on this module. Your hands are smaller, you can reach it more easily." Jake hesitated for only a moment before stepping forward. Zora guided him, her voice steady as she explained the delicate task. His heart pounded as he worked, every movement feeling like it could either save the planet or doom it. "You're doing well," Zora said, her tone encouraging. "Just a little more." Finally, the module clicked into place, and a hum of energy coursed through the ship. Zora stepped back, her face alight with determination. "It's ready." The team quickly evacuated as Zora activated the disruptor from the ship's console. A beam of concentrated energy shot toward the vortex, its light blindingly bright. The ground trembled violently, and the air crackled with energy. Jake shielded his eyes, barely able to breathe as the vortex resisted, its swirling chaos growing more violent. For a moment, it seemed as if the disruptor might not be enough. Then, with a deafening roar, the vortex began to collapse in on itself, its vibrant colors fading into nothingness. When the light finally subsided, the sky was clear once more. A stunned silence fell over the crowd as everyone processed what had just happened. Then, slowly, cheers began to rise, growing louder and more jubilant with each passing second. Jake turned to Zora, who was leaning against her ship, clearly exhausted but smiling faintly. "You did it," he said, his voice filled with awe. "No," Zora replied, her eyes meeting his. "We did it. Your people's ingenuity and determination made this possible." Agent Miller approached, his usually stoic expression softened. "You saved a lot of lives today." "Thank you." Zora nodded, her exhaustion evident. "It was the right thing to do. But my work here isn't finished. Celestia still needs repairs before I can leave, and there's much more I wish to learn about your people." Miller hesitated, then extended a hand. "We'll help you. As long as you're here, you're our guest." Zora shook his hand, her smile widening. "Thank you. Perhaps this is the beginning of something extraordinary." As the crowd began to disperse, Jake stood beside Zora, looking up at the now peaceful sky. "You know," he said, "for someone who crash-landed in the middle of a classroom, you've done a pretty good job of fitting in." Zora laughed softly, the sound melodic. "Your world has been more welcoming than I could have hoped. I look forward to learning more." The faint hum of her ship filled the air as it powered down, a reminder that her time on Earth wasn't over yet. But for now, they had won, and the future held endless possibilities. Humanity's triumph. The days following the vortex's collapse were a whirlwind of activity. Zora's presence on Earth had become a global sensation. The initial fear and skepticism surrounding her arrival had begun to dissipate, replaced by curiosity and cautious admiration. News outlets buzzed with stories of the alien who had helped avert a catastrophe, and Zora found herself at the center of humanity's attention. Despite the growing frenzy, Zora remained focused on repairing Celestia. She spent long hours at the crash site, working tirelessly alongside Earth's engineers. What had begun as a tense collaboration had transformed into a harmonious exchange of ideas. Zora's advanced knowledge blended with human ingenuity, creating solutions neither could have achieved alone. Jake often found himself by her side, fascinated by the process. He had taken it upon himself to act as Zora's unofficial guide to Earth, answering her endless stream of questions and helping her navigate the nuances of human culture. Their bond had grown stronger with each passing day, built on mutual respect and a shared sense of wonder. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Zora paused her work to gaze at the horizon. "Your world is beautiful," she said, her voice soft. "Its imperfections make it unique." Jake smiled, leaning against the side of her ship. "It's not perfect, but we do our best. Kind of like us, I guess." Zora tilted her head, considering his words. "Humans have a remarkable capacity for growth. You face adversity with resilience, finding strength in your connections to one another." Jake chuckled. "You make us sound better than we are." "No," Zora said firmly, her violet eyes meeting his. "You underestimate yourselves. That is both your weakness and your strength." Their quiet moment was interrupted by Agent Miller, who approached with a determined stride. "Zora," he began, his tone serious but respectful, "our scientists have completed their analysis of the vortex's energy signature. They've detected faint remnants of instability. It's unlikely to cause immediate harm, but there's a chance it could resurface." Zora frowned, her luminescent skin dimming slightly as she processed the news. "That is troubling. The vortex should have fully collapsed." Miller nodded. "We were hoping you might have an idea of what's causing the remnants." Zora considered this for a moment. "It's possible the vortex was artificially created. If so, its energy source might still be active." Jake's eyes widened. "You mean someone, or something, created it on purpose?" "It's a possibility," Zora admitted. "If that's true, we must locate the source and neutralize it." Miller's expression darkened. "We'll deploy our resources to investigate, but we'll need your expertise." "Of course," Zora said. "I'll assist in any way I can." Over the next several days, Zora and the team worked tirelessly to analyze the data. They identified a remote location where the residual energy was strongest, a desolate area far from any populated regions. The team prepared for a mission to investigate, and Zora insisted on accompanying them. Jake volunteered to join as well, despite Miller's initial objections. "You're a teacher, not a soldier," Miller had said. But Jake was adamant. "I've been with Zora from the start. I'm not sitting this one out." When the team arrived at the site, they discovered a hidden facility buried beneath the ground. The structure was old, its architecture alien yet eerily familiar. Zora examined the markings on the walls, her fingers tracing the intricate patterns. "This isn't from my world," she said. "But the technology is advanced. Whoever built this had knowledge of interdimensional energy." As they ventured deeper into the facility, they found a massive machine at its core. It hummed with faint energy, its design intricate and otherworldly. Zora's expression hardened. "This is the source. It's keeping the vortex's energy alive." Jake stared at the machine, a mix of awe and apprehension. "Can we shut it down?" "We have to," Zora said. "But it's risky. If the energy isn't contained properly, it could destabilize again." Miller gestured to his team. "What do you need?" Zora quickly formulated a plan, explaining the precise steps needed to disable the machine. It required a delicate balance of human and alien technology, and everyone worked together under her guidance. As the machine powered down, the facility began to tremble. Zora's voice was calm but urgent. "The energy is dispersing. We need to leave now." The team evacuated just as the facility collapsed in on itself, the ground shaking violently. When the dust settled, the faint energy signature of the vortex was gone. Back at the crash site, Zora confirmed that the danger had passed. The vortex was finally sealed, and Earth was safe. Miller approached Zora, extending a hand. "You've done more for us than we could have ever expected." "Thank you." Zora shook his hand, her smile radiant. "It was my honor." Your people have shown me the strength of unity and creativity. As the team celebrated their success, Jake stood beside Zora, feeling a mix of relief and sadness. So, what now? He asked. Zora looked at him, her expression thoughtful. My ship is nearly repaired. I'll need to leave soon. But I will always remember what I've learned here. Jake nodded, trying to mask his disappointment. You've taught us a lot too. Zora placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. Perhaps this is not the end, but the beginning of a greater connection between our worlds. As the stars began to fill the night sky, Zora gazed upward, her thoughts drifting to the endless possibilities that lay ahead. The legacy. The day had come for Zora to leave. Her ship, Celestia, now fully repaired, gleamed under the morning sun. A small crowd had gathered at the crash site to see her off. Scientists, engineers, and even a few curious townspeople stood quietly, their expressions a mix of awe and sadness. Zora emerged from the ship one last time, her glowing form as radiant as ever. She walked to the center of the crowd, her silver hair shimmering like liquid light, and addressed them with a smile that carried both gratitude and a tinge of melancholy. You have shown me the strength of your people, she said, her voice carrying across the gathering. Your creativity, resilience, and ability to unite in the face of adversity are qualities I will share with my own. Humanity has much to offer the universe. The crowd responded with a ripple of applause, their initial fear of the alien visitor long gone. Jake stood near the front, his hands shoved in his pockets as he tried to keep his emotions in check. Zora's eyes found his, and she walked over, her expression softening. I will miss this world, she said quietly, her voice carrying a sincerity that made Jake's throat tighten. But most of all, I will miss the people I've met, especially you. Jake smiled, though his heart felt heavy. You've been a pretty unforgettable guest, Zora. Don't forget us when you're out there exploring the stars. Zora tilted her head, her violet eyes filled with warmth. Forget you? Impossible. Humanity has left an indelible mark on my heart. The two stood in silence for a moment, the weight of goodbye pressing down on them. Then Zora stepped back and raised her hand in a luminarian gesture of farewell, a graceful wave followed by a hand pressed to her chest. Jake returned the gesture, his own way of honoring the bond they'd formed. Agent Miller approached, his usual stoicism softened. Safe travels, Zora. If you ever find yourself back in this part of the galaxy, you'll have friends here. Zora nodded, her smile widening. Thank you, Agent Miller. I hope that one day, our worlds will meet again, this time, not as strangers, but as allies. With that, Zora turned and walked back toward Celestia. The ship's ramp closed behind her, and a low hum filled the air as its engines powered up. The crowd stepped back, shielding their eyes as the ship rose gracefully into the sky. It hovered for a moment, its shimmering hull reflecting the light of the sun, before it streaked upward and disappeared into the stars. For a long time, no one spoke. The crowd slowly began to disperse, their expressions contemplative. Jake remained where he was, staring at the sky long after the ship was gone. Do you think she'll come back? One of the engineers asked, breaking the silence. Jake smiled faintly, his gaze still fixed on the horizon. I hope so. Months passed, and life gradually returned to normal. The events surrounding Zora's visit became the stuff of legends, inspiring countless stories, articles, and even a few conspiracy theories. Yet for those who had met her, the impact was deeply personal. Jake found himself reflecting often on their time together. Inspired by Zora's boundless curiosity, he incorporated her lessons into his teaching, encouraging his students to embrace creativity and think beyond their limits. He shared stories of her visit, careful to balance the wonder with the lessons she had imparted. Meanwhile, the scientific community continued to study the data Zora had left behind. Her contributions had sparked a wave of innovation, pushing humanity's understanding of energy, technology, and the universe to new heights. The collaborative efforts during her stay had united nations and opened doors to unprecedented progress. One quiet evening, Jake stood on his porch, gazing at the night sky. The stars twinkled above, each one a reminder of the vastness of the universe. He couldn't help but wonder where Zora was now, what new world she was exploring, and whether she thought of Earth as often as he thought of her. Then, in the stillness, a faint light streaked across the sky. It was subtle, barely more than a flicker, but it was enough to make Jake's heart skip a beat. A smile tugged at his lips as he raised a hand in a luminarian farewell gesture. "Goodbye, Zora," he murmured. "Until next time." Above him, the stars seemed to shine just a little brighter.